Chapter 1. The Unopened Drawer. Eleanor Graham had always believed that life was much like the sea, calm on the surface, hiding numerous forgotten things beneath. At 52, she lived in a weather-worn cottage on the edge of Eastbridge, a small town famous for its quiet harbor, windy cliffs, and a way of life that never hurried. Whatever the world fussed about, news headlines, trends, new technologies, Eastbridge returned only a patient silence, like waves rolling endlessly toward the shore. Eleanor's routine had changed little over the years. She woke before the sun graced the horizon, brewed a pot of chamomile tea, and watched the sea through her lace-curtained window. Every morning she sat at the same cedarwood desk her father had gifted her on her 18th birthday. It stood in the corner of the sitting room, facing the great window looking east. In the bottom drawer of that desk, tucked away behind income receipts, old postcards, and fragile bundles of milky white ribbon, sat a particular envelope, yellowed, unsent, and forgotten more than 2 decades before. Across the front was a name written carefully in blue ink: Thomas Whitlock. She hadn't opened the drawer in years, not since she had accepted the idea that life can sometimes move on without closure. That Tuesday morning, as spring gently spread its wings, a sudden gust rattled the hinges of her little seaside house. Eleanor walked quietly across the wooden floorboards, pressing her palms against the glass pane of the window. The ocean beyond trembled, sun rising just above the water's endless blue. The warmth of morning light whispered across her face, and for reasons she could not quite name, memory stirred. Somewhere deep inside, there was a sense, unsettling, tender, that something long overdue was asking to be heard. Chapter 2. A Whisper from the Past. The Eastbridge post office had stood on Hillcrest Street since Eleanor was a child. Built of red brick, with a brass bell atop its wooden door, it was a modest place, usually occupied by only the postmaster, Mr. Aldridge, and his sleepy old cat, Percival. As Eleanor walked past later that morning, she hesitated. The brass bell glinted in the sun, and for a second she imagined herself walking through the door, envelope in hand. But what would be the point now? After 23 years, after all the things left unsaid, where could that letter even go? She continued on to the market to buy her usual, a jar of lavender honey and a small bouquet of bluebells. She greeted Mrs. Davenport, who always set aside fresh scones for her, and shared the latest news with Mr. Chen, whose modest vegetable stand was her favorite in town. "Eleanor," he said kindly, "lovely day, isn't it?" She smiled, hesitant. "It is. Funny how some days feel as if they're nudging you to do something you almost want to ignore." Mr. Chen chuckled. "Sometimes that's precisely when you shouldn't ignore it." On her walk home, the wind leaned against her back as though guiding her. The waves crashed softly in the distance. Gulls drew languid circles along the sky. Upon reaching her house, she paused at her front door. The little cottage seemed to wait for her. Heart lightly fluttering, she walked straight to her desk. She hadn't opened that bottom drawer since turning 30. Every time she thought of doing so, her fingers would stop halfway, afraid to stir memories. But today, something felt different. She gently tugged the handle. The drawer opened with a faint sigh, as if remembering. And there it was, the envelope, edges frayed, name still legible. Thomas Whitlock. Her breath caught. Chapter 3. Back Then. Thomas had come to Eastbridge the summer Eleanor was 29. He was a traveling watercolor artist, stopping in small coastal towns to capture the shimmer of light across the sea. She'd first seen him at the pier, easel up, wind-swept hair falling into his eyes. She had been carrying a basket of strawberries from Mrs. Davenport's stall, and a few had spilled when a gust of wind pushed the basket from her grip. Thomas had rushed over, kneeling beside her as they picked them up from the wooden planks of the pier. "Seems even the strawberries want their freedom," he had joked. She'd laughed, cheeks flushed. From then on he appeared often, in the cafe, at the market, sketching the cliffside at golden hour. Their conversations were slow and gentle. They talked about books she loved, about the stories behind his paintings, about how strange it was to meet someone who felt at once familiar. That summer, she learned the tender magic of uncertainty, the quiet wonder of not knowing what came next, and the thrill of just being. They shared early morning coffees, late afternoon walks, and evenings on the beach, shoes in hand, as they let the cold tide swirl around their ankles. As autumn arrived, he told her he was leaving again. He had an exhibition in Vienna. He would be gone by winter. And so, one October evening, sitting at her cedarwood desk, Eleanor had written a letter for him. She had poured everything into it, her hopes, her fears, her wish to ask him to stay, or at least to know if he wanted her to come with him. But she had never sent it. Fear, she thought, was a cruel guard of the heart. The next morning, Thomas had knocked at her door to say goodbye. She had smiled, wished him well, and watched him walk away through dewy morning light. The letter remained in her drawer. Chapter 4. A Visit. Holding the envelope now, Eleanor hesitated. What might that younger version of herself have wanted to say? She carefully broke the seal and unfolded the 3 pages inside. The writing was delicate, undeniably hers, full of what-ifs and almosts. With every line she read, a warmth pooled in her chest, tinged with sadness. The last line read, "If you ever find yourself wondering too, you know where I'll be. Just look for me where the sea meets the sky." She folded the letter again, hands trembling. Did it matter anymore? Just then, the bell above her door rang. It startled her. She rarely had unexpected visitors. When she opened the door, she found a tall, silver-haired man standing under the porch. He carried a leather satchel, paintbrushes peeking from the side. Her heart stopped. "Thomas?" she whispered. He looked at her just as stunned. "Eleanor Graham, as I live and breathe." Her hand flew to her chest. I didn't expect to." He looked older, yes, softer around the eyes, a touch of time in his smile. But he was unmistakably the same Thomas who had once painted the Eastbridge sunrise as though the colors themselves sang. "I'm sorry to appear out of the blue," he said, clearing his throat. "I was nearby and thought I might see the old town. I didn't know if you were still here." Eleanor stepped aside. "Would you like some tea?" "Yes," he said, smiling with that same gentle warmth she remembered. "Very much." Chapter 5. Letters without postcards. Over tea, they talked cautiously at first, navigating years of absence. He told her about his exhibitions across Europe, how he'd settled in a small studio in Florence, and how he often thought of Eastbridge. She told him about her quiet job at the local library, how she still baked lemon tarts every Sunday, and how everything had changed and yet somehow remained the same. There was only one thing she didn't mention, the letter in her drawer. But as the afternoon shifted into a golden hush, they walked together down to the harbor. The years seemed to peel away like leaves caught in the wind. "I always wondered," Thomas said softly, eyes on the sea, "what would have happened if I had stayed?" She hugged her arms. "I wondered too." He looked at her, searching her face. "I never quite found another place that felt like home." Her breath trembled. "Why did you leave then?" she asked, before she could stop herself. He sighed. "I thought it was what I was supposed to do, to chase the next thing. Ambition can be loud." She understood. Silence stretched, tender, painful, sweet.
Chapter 6. Truth Revealed. Back at the cottage, twilight painted everything in soft colors. Eleanor hesitated, but then walked to her desk, opened the drawer, and gently took out the envelope. She turned to him. "There's something I never sent." She handed him the letter. He looked at her, surprised, then sat in the armchair by the window, carefully unfolding the pages worn by time. As he read, she watched emotions flicker across his face. Surprise, regret, something tender and deep that glowed quietly in his eyes. When he finally looked up, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Eleanor, all this time?" She nodded, unable to find words. He stood and reached for her hand. "I would have stayed, you know, if I'd known." Tears sprang unexpectedly to her eyes. "I was afraid of ruining what we had, of hoping too much." He stepped closer, touching her cheek. "Sometimes the letters we never send are the ones that write our lives instead." She let out a trembling breath. "Is it too late?" Thomas smiled softly. "I don't think the heart keeps time the way clocks do."
Chapter 7. A Different Sunrise. Thomas stayed in Eastbridge that night, taking the guest room that overlooked the cliffs. The next morning, Eleanor woke before dawn. She brewed chamomile tea just as she always did, but this time she set 2 cups on the table. Thomas joined her quietly, watching the horizon swell with morning light. For a long time they didn't speak. They simply watched as the sun rose, spilling gold across the calm sea. Finally, he turned to her. "I'll stay for a little while, if you'd like." She smiled. "I'd like that." Days blended gently into one another. They walked through town, visited the old cafe, sat on the pier where they'd first met. He painted again, watercolor skies, lavender-hued seas, and sometimes her silhouette standing at the shore. The townsfolk greeted him with familiarity, surprised but delighted at his return. Slowly, his presence became its own kind of calm. People stopped whispering. He wasn't a visitor anymore, just another thread woven into Eastbridge's slow, steady heart. But one afternoon, he lingered by the harbor, expression conflicted. She joined him. "Is everything all right?" He hesitated. "Florence, my studio. I still have a life there," he said softly. "But here, I feel something I haven't felt in years. Peace, and perhaps a second chance." She placed her hand on his. "You don't have to decide today." He looked at her gratefully. "Sometimes I wish I could rewind everything." She smiled, wind brushing her hair. "Sometimes it's enough just to start again."
Chapter 8. Finding Time in Between. Weeks passed. Thomas painted a small exhibition titled Eastbridge Revisited, held in the town hall.
His paintings glowed with quiet love. The pier at dawn, a lighthouse at dusk, children laughing near the lagoon, and in the center, a painting titled "The Letter You Never Sent." It showed a woman sitting at a desk, candlelight flickering, holding a letter to her chest, expression somewhere between hope and surrender. The townsfolk adored the collection. At the opening, Mr. Aldridge from the post office tapped the painting and said, "If only she'd sent it, eh?" Eleanor smiled faintly. Perhaps some letters find their way eventually without stamps. Thomas stood beside her, proud and quiet. That evening they walked home arm in arm. The road glittered under street lamps, and being together felt soft, like a familiar melody rediscovered. Still, there lingered the question of the future. He had obligations, and she had a life deeply rooted in Eastbridge's tides and seasons. One night over supper, he looked serious. "Would you," he asked carefully, "ever consider coming with me to Florence, even just for a time?" Her fork paused. "It would be hard to leave here," she admitted. "This town is in my bones." He nodded, understanding. "I know, but I don't want to lose you again." Her heart swelled with both fear and courage. "Perhaps," she said after a moment, "the answer is not choosing one or the other." She smiled. "Perhaps we simply share the time. Some months here, some months there." Thomas looked at her, wonder brightening his gaze. "You would be willing?" "Life is too short," she said softly, "to keep writing unsent letters." He took her hand, kissing her knuckles. "I won't ask you to wait this time. We'll move together." Her smile trembled with joy.
Chapter 9. A New Letter. Months later, Eleanor sat again at her cedarwood desk, but everything had changed. The drawer no longer housed old regrets, but instead was slowly filling with new postcards she and Thomas collected on their shared travels. She picked up a sheet of stationery and wrote a new letter, but this time it wasn't filled with unsent longing. It was addressed to herself. "Dear Eleanor," she wrote, "thank you for finally believing that some chances are worth taking twice. You are never too old for new chapters, nor too late for love. Trust the tides." She sealed the letter not to store it away, but to keep it in her suitcase, so that whenever she doubted the path ahead, she could open it and remember. Thomas entered the room carrying a pair of train tickets. "Florence in 2 days," he said. "Are you sure you're ready?" She stood, taking his arm. "I've never been more ready." Together they walked down to the sea one last time before their departure, watching gulls swoop above the foamy surf. The wind brushed warm against their cheeks. "Do you remember," she said, voice playful, "when I told you I believed the sea hid forgotten things?" He smiled. "Perhaps it also reveals them when the time is right." They walked along the shoreline as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. And as Eleanor looked out at the place where the sky touched the sea, she felt the truth shimmer. Some stories begin not with the first hello, but with the courage it takes to say what might have been left unsaid.